While the US Army grew their influence throughout the American continent, the effects of American expansion on the Bozeman Trail were largely minimal. The territory that stretches out from southern Montana to the eastern Wyoming region was inhabited by Native American tribes who had no intention in abandoning their land without a fight. It was the year 1868 when the Lakota leader Red Cloud and his army of natives fought the US Army to a standstill. The US government, realizing their failure, signed a deal with the Lakota and Cheyenne tribes, allowing them to continue living on established reservations while avoiding extensive European settlement. The treaty was not signed by all of the Sioux tribe members, as it limited their free movement on their native land, and for the next 8 years after the treaty, many of them still moved out of reservation living their traditional lives. In a statement, one of the Lakota leaders who took part in Red Cloud's war remarked,
"I wish all to know that I do not propose to sell any part of my country."
Despite living out of reservation for some years, there were no major incidents between the natives and white settlers, but all of that changed after an officer named George Armstrong Custer led an illegal expedition into the Black Hills, which was officially part of the Great Sioux Nation. On this expedition, some of his men supposedly found gold in the hills, and within a short amount of time, miners under the protection of Custer's army would flood into the Black Hills searching for gold. Not taking into account that the Black Hills are sacred ground to the natives of the region, they would soon find out that they entered into the lion's den. Tensions reached a boiling point when General Custer received orders to remove all natives that lived out of reservation throughout the region and put them into a much reduced one. Any native who disobeyed would be viewed as hostile. Most natives, on the other hand, abandoned their reservations and proceeded to Montana to join forces with Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse at their rapidly expanding camp. Numbering in the thousands, the group eventually settled on the bank of the Little Bighorn River, and the stage was set for the Great Sioux War. Natives from remote reservations along the Missouri River reported that US soldiers were heading towards the encampment to fight them. Thus, for tactical reasons, camps of various native tribes were kept together. There are at least 6 close camps with the Cheyenne at the north and the Sioux in the south, comprising a total of around 7,000 people, whereby 1/3 existed out of men and boys of fighting age. The US Army consisted out of 700 cavalrymen and scouts, and were marching out of Fort Abraham Lincoln, in the direction of what they anticipated to be a successful confrontation with the Indians. Less than 2 weeks before confrontation, Lakota tribe leader Sitting Bull underwent the legendary Sundance Ritual. The ritual required holding up his arms and standing while his attendants performed 50 separate cuts in his arms, such that small pieces of flesh would dangle off the 50 cuts when they were made. Then he performed a long dance around the pole, and it was during this ritual that he saw a vision of many dead soldiers. Then he told his fellow men that this vision that he saw was a prelude to a victorious battle with the US Army. The first confrontation took place in the territory of Montana, between the forces of George Crook and the Native Americans who were led by Crazy Horse. George Crook was known for commanding the US forces in the campaign that led to the defeat of the Apache leader Geronimo, and confident that he ignored his advisors who tried to convince him that there were too many enemy natives to face, and that it would be better to wait for reinforcements instead. He felt so invincible that he blundered right into the trap they had laid for him, and at no point during the hours-long battle could General Crook have any control over what was happening. Whenever he would send his men on a charge, the Lakota would retreat to a better position, open fire, and drive the men back. The hit-and-run tactics of Crazy Horse would ultimately stop the advancement of Officer Crook, and the unsuccessful battle would be his last participation in the war. What was even more worse was that he didn't send any word to his colleague officers that he could no longer be relied upon. On June 21, 1876, 4 days after the failed attack by Officer Crook, the 7th Cavalry Regiment led by George Armstrong Custer set out towards the valley of the Little Big Horn. There they anticipated the presence of the natives. Custer pushed his men so hard that in one single day his regiment could cover a distance of 33 miles. On June 24th they would approach the river of the Little Big Horn, and were several miles to the east of where the Lakota and Cheyenne tribes encamped. Custer's men by now were completely exhausted by the 3 days ride, and being unaware of Officer Crook's lost battle the day before, they would confront the Indians without their flanks being covered by his regiment. The morning of June 26, Custer considered launching a coordinated surprise attack on the camp, but when he was informed that some enemies had found the track his soldiers had left behind during their march, he immediately made the quick decision to attack the encampment without further delay. After a few hours of rest during the day, they rode again at night the last few miles towards the Indians, so that the attack could take place early in the next morning. When they were almost in a position to attack, Custer decided to divide up his command in 4 groups. He sent orders for 2 units to attack the camp from the south in an effort to stop the indigenous from escaping, while 1 small battalion was to remain with the supply train. Custer himself would charge in with his unit with a precarious frontal attack. Custer's army now reached the camp and found a force of natives against all prejudices that he had about the Indians. Judged by all past experiences, the Indians that he fought before would scatter and run upon their approach. They found instead a force of disciplined warriors who fought with determination equal to their own. They thought to find a band with old muskets and discarded rifles, with primitive spear and bow and arrow. Instead they found an enemy far better armed than they themselves, possessing Winchester rifles at the latest pattern, and stores of ammunition that seemed inexhaustible. When one of Custer's army units led by Commander Reno rode into the attack with a pitiful force of 112 men, Reno expected to bring only an advanced guard action as was the plan, and that Custer with his larger and stronger force would deliver the main attack, supporting his charge from the rear. But instead of supporting, Custer changed direction and rode 5 miles down the river without notifying Reno of his change of purpose. As a result of this heedless action, General Custer's unit was separated from the rest of the army, and would now be on his own to fight the large hordes of Lakotas and Cheyenne Indians. After some heavy fighting, Crazy Horse would successfully encircle Custer and his soldiers. When the soldiers desperately fought and tried to retreat, Crazy Horse charged with his unit from the rear and smashed into the soldiers, which left them completely surrounded. Many of them were killed, and panic spread among the soldiers. They began to dismount their horses in order to use them as cover. Now surrounded from all sides, Custer's last stand wasn't much of a fight, it was a slaughter. Some of Reno's men who had ridden towards the shooting watched the hill in the distance swarming with natives. They seemed to be shooting at things on the ground. The natives were not fighting, but finishing off the wounded. Custer's body later on would be found with 2 bullet wounds, one near his heart and one in the head. When the main army was decimated, the natives would encircle the remaining force. They fought all day long, until General Terry's reinforcements arrived and saved them from total annihilation. The natives retreated, and the Battle of the Bighorn would be one of the largest defeats of the US Army against the Native Americans. At the end of the battle, the US Army had lost about 280 soldiers, while native losses numbered around 160. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to click that like button. Also don't forget to subscribe and click the bell to be notified about our latest videos.